couple of Sundays ago, I gave a sermon about the proposed revision of Article 2 of our UUA bylaws by the aptly named Article 2 Study Commission. Article 2 contains the purposes and the covenant of our Association of Unitarian Universalist Congregations, known more familiarly as our 7 principles, which Kathleen led us in this morning. If you'd like to learn more about the specifics for the proposed revisions, you can visit the uua.org website, or you can pick up a printed copy of their 26-page report on the welcome table in the vestry during social hour. Now, you may remember that because you remember every sermon I give, right? You may remember that in the proposal there was this image that they presented of the covenant. Oh, I'm starting it on fire. I probably shouldn't do that because somebody might think that's how I feel, and it's not. And you'll see that the very center of it is love. And then there are these 6 core values: justice, interdependence, equity, transformation, and pluralism, that all come out of love. And in the introduction to the new covenant that they are proposing, the Commission writes, "As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is the center of our shared values," as we saw in the image. "We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love," with a capital L. So the first thing that came to my mind when I read that was, here come the Universalists. And the second thing was, I am very curious about what love with a capital L means. As I shared in another sermon 2 weeks ago, so you have to really have paid attention to go with this sermon. Love can be understood in several different ways. Greek philosophy defined 8 distinct kinds of love, from the intimate love of partners, to the affectionate love toward family and friends, to the altruistic love of service to all humankind. They left out dogs, unconditional love, and that's a category in and of itself completely, as we know. My 2 reactions that I had to this proposed covenant are related to one another. To understand why the spiritual discipline of love is the foundation of this proposed covenant, it helps to know about the Universalist side of our history and our tradition. When the Unitarian and the Universalist denominations merged in 1961, it was not without some bumps and bruises. The 2 traditions did share some important common values. They were both religiously and socially progressive. They supported freedom of conscience and belief. They both believed in human potential and goodness. And both had been deemed heretical by traditional Orthodox Christianity. They were both very small and realized that their best chances for survival lay in joining together. But there were some important cultural and theological differences that were never fully resolved during the merger, that went back to their beginnings. The Unitarians culturally came mainly from the Boston Brahmin elite. They tended to be highly educated, viewing religion through the lens of scholarship and reason. They tended to come from the professional classes, business owners, civil and political leaders, doctors, lawyers, professors, teachers. Unitarianism began to leave behind its Christian identity in the 1800s, first with the Transcendentalist movement. Think Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Theodore Parker, and the founding of the Free Religious Association, which had gathered for the purpose of emancipating religion from the dogmatic traditions it had been previously bound to, including any reference to supernaturalism, in their commitment to affirm the supremacy of individual conscience and individual reason, the perfectibility of humanity, democratic faith in the worth of each individual, and the importance of natural rights. This was the beginning of religious humanism. And by the time of the merger in 1961, religious humanism was the dominant theology or philosophy of Unitarianism, with some Universalists also embracing it. Corliss Lamont defines religious humanism as a naturalistic philosophy that rejects all supernaturalism and relies primarily upon reason and science, democracy and human compassion, or as the heading on the American Humanist Association says, good without God. Universalism came out of a different place. John Murray, the founder of Universalism in America, established the first congregation in Gloucester, Massachusetts in 1774. He had left his native England, where he had been a Methodist minister, but excommunicated for his heretical belief in universal salvation. In other words, that God was the God of love, not the God of judgment that was prevalent in the Calvinist theology of the time, and that all souls would eventually be saved. The words, "Give them not hell, but hope and courage," preach the kindness and everlasting love of God, has been attributed to him as his core message. Whether he actually said this, we do not know, but I'm going with it, though. Universalism found its resonance in the rural areas of New England and upstate New York, and later among people from the working classes in the cities. Lowell, for example, once had 3 Universalist churches, to the 2 Unitarian ones. And the Universalist congregations were very, very involved in supporting the mill girls who worked in the town's factories. Universalist preachers were often itinerant, going from community to community to lead worship, as many of the smaller congregations could not afford clergy. They held tent revival meetings where there was lots of singing and even dancing. Their belief that God's love and forgiveness extended to all souls underlaid their social outreach and their social justice work, for they believed that the faithful response to God's unconditional love was to love their neighbors, to try to create heaven on earth. They were one of the first denominations to take a stand against the enslavement of their fellow human beings. In their 1790 Articles of Faith, they wrote, "We believe it to be inconsistent with the union of the human race in a common Savior, and the obligations to mutual and universal love which flow from that union, to hold any of our fellow creatures in bondage." In the mid-1800s, when both denominations were at their stronger periods, it was the practice of Protestant clergy around Boston to swap pulpits. It was telling of the divide that the Unitarian ministers refused to swap pulpits with the most famous and influential Universalist preacher and theologian, Hosea Ballou, whose Treatise of Atonement we heard from. It's one of my favorites, you can tell, because the pages are falling out of my copy of it. I love him. They found his style too bombastic, his manners uncultured, which was how they viewed Universalist congregations as well, filled as they were with the less enlightened, simple folks. I have shared before the famous quip by Thomas Starr King, who served congregations in both denominations and described the difference between the two as the Universalists think God is too good to damn them forever. The Unitarians think they are too good to be damned forever. So at the merger came these two, 1961. Some Universalists had become Unitarian in their theology, including the Reverend Kenneth Patton, a Universalist humanist who was responsible for the hymns for the celebration of life, or the blue hymnal, which is the one that I grew up with before the gray hymnal. But many Universalists still considered themselves Christian and felt marginalized by the dominance of Unitarian thinking and theology in the founding of this new combined faith. Unitarianism's humanist movement, with its emphasis on reason, individual freedom, and the ultimacy of human goodness and progress onward and upward forever, had a larger presence in what would become our 1985 UUA covenant, our 7 principles. The single mention of God in one of the sources and the lack of any mention of all of Jesus was painful for many Universalists who did put them at the center of their faith. The dismissal of ritual and the dismissal of heart and spirit-led worship as superstitious left some Universalists feeling that their religion had gone cold. All changes, even healthy and good ones, come with loss, and the Universalists felt it more. So what's shifted that has suddenly brought some of the Universalist theology centered on love back into the fore? I can think of a couple reasons. One is the growing inclusion of perspectives and thus theologies from the margins, particularly liberation theologies, Black, feminist, womanist, peoples of color. Liberation theologies challenge the characteristics of centering on white supremacy culture, some of which can be found in our tradition, including focus on perfectionism, individualism, belief in objectivity, the idea that progress is always bigger and more, the right of comfort, and paternalism. My thanks to Coach Justice Williams for sharing these descriptions. I think also the embrace of pagan and earth-centered spiritualities that find the sacred and holy in nature, recognizing that human beings are not the pinnacle of creation, but part of it. I think, too, about the tragedies and violence of our era, 9/11, the endless rounds of mass shootings, the police killings of people of color, genocides in places like Rwanda, wars around the world, and reckoning with our country's history, our history of enslavement and Jim Crow, of the removal and genocide of indigenous peoples, of the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Just some of the things that have made us have to grapple with the reality of evil, sin, and suffering, and not as individual acts, but as systems and institutions that perpetuate them. No religion and no human community is perfect, and each offers gifts. Our Unitarian heritage has given us the practice of covenant, which binds us together through freedom rather than fear or conformity. It also reminds us that revelation is not sealed, that we will always be learning and hopefully growing in our understanding of ourselves, each other, and the world. These things are very precious to me. I also love our Universalist tradition. I am a humanist and I am a theist. I do believe there's a divine spirit, a divine presence, who calls us to embody love's practice in our relationships with one another and with all life. And I believe that Jesus was one who embodied this love, a divine love that I know more through my heart than my head. So I have always had a quiet, special attachment to our Universalist tradition, in some ways finding myself more at home. So while I have questions and concerns, I am more excited than unsettled about this shift to put the spiritual discipline of love with a capital L at the heart of our UUA covenant. Knowing our Universalist heritage and its gospel, it makes some sense to me. And at the same time, I do think we need to pay attention to what we're saying here. The gospel of Universalism was radical in its notion that God loved every human being unconditionally, in part because Universalism did not dismiss the notion of sin or evil. They were real too. But the Universalists believed that God's love was stronger, that it was infinite, that it was healing, the great physician, as Ballou put it, while sin was finite and could be overcome and could be transformed through love. To trust in this love engendered a joyful response on the one hand, which gave Universalism its spirited spirit. And it also called its followers to the discipline of love, to love one another, to create communities with one another and with the whole world in that same spirit in which they believed God embraced them. Now, who knows how these proposed revisions to Article 2 will make their way through the 2-year process of getting approved or not. I hope along the way we will spend some time discerning what the spiritual discipline of love with a capital L means in practice and not just in words, because I sense that Unitarian Universalism is using the word love like other traditions use the word God. When I think of that psalm, that recasting of Psalm 23, that's what I hear in it. And that means we're making love central to our faith and our worship, the source of our deepest commitments, our values, our ethics, our loyalty, our sacrifice. I believe we can individually use different theologies to ground ourselves to get there, Buddhist and pagan and Christian and humanist and liberation theologies, even Unitarian and Universalist. But we will need not just the enthusiastic spirit of our Universalist ancestors, but their honesty about human failure and cruelty, and the deep courage of their conviction that love blesses every one of us from its infinite well, follows us with goodness and kindness and grace, and will not let us go, should we choose to abide in that house together.